So thank you, Mike, for joining me in the debate. For everybody listening, tonight's debate is there evidence for theism? So I'm going to start off with some definitions. God, simply a metaphysically ultimate being. He's conscious, all-powerful, all-knowing, all the omni properties. Time, since many famous definitions of time employ temporal notions and are hence circular, we may conclude that time is too basic to be defined. So regardless in the context of this argument, time is understood as relational, as a series of changes ordered by earlier than and later than relations. And cause is generally any factor that influences an event. It does not have to be determinately cause or influence it. So, for example, quantum fluctuations are indeterminate causes. They indeterminately influence what will happen with, for example, virtual particles. What is evidence? Broadly defined, evidence is anything that supports a given proposition or a more expected given during a certain hypothesis. So for the purpose of this debate, the only burden of proof I really hold is to provide anything that raises the probability of the theistic hypothesis at all. In this instance, an argument for God's existence is evidence for theism. In anticipation of my opponent's objection, arguments are not evidence, I offer this. I partially agree. Arguments without support for the premises are not evidence. For those unaware, deductive arguments are a set of premises that lead to an unavoidable conclusion. So just like 2 + 2 = 4 is a mathematical proof, a deductive argument is a propositional proof if and only if the premises are justified. For example, here's a mathematical proof. Numbers ending in 0 or 5 are divisible by 5. 35 ends in a 5, therefore 35 is divisible by 5. Likewise, here's a propositional proof. Bachelors are unmarried men. Bill is an unmarried man. Therefore, Bill is a bachelor. This argument is therefore evidence for the proposition Bill is a bachelor. So again, an analogy for evidence and what it is. Imagine we have 2 jars of jelly beans. Jar 1 has 10 beans, 2 orange and 8 blue. Jar 2 has 10 beans, 7 orange and 3 blue. Say we had someone pull 1 jelly bean randomly out of a jar while we're blindfolded, and then they hide jars. The blindfold comes off and we see they have 1 orange jelly bean. The question now is, which jar did the jelly bean come out from? Our hypotheses are either jar 1 and jar 2. It's obviously that it probably came from jar 2. And why is that? Because jar 2 has more orange jelly beans than jar 1. And we can formalize this too and say getting an orange jelly bean is evidence for the jar 2 hypothesis because our data point, the orange jelly bean, is more expected on the jar hypothesis than the jar 1 hypothesis. For those viewing my slides live, this would be a formal equation. The probability of O given 2 is greater than the probability of O given 1, therefore probably 2 is true. This is how philosophers of science, and even scientists themselves conceive of evidence. So we don't need to strictly test and repeat the act of pulling out of the jar to have evidence of which jar it came out from. So from a collective case of theism, I'm going to break this down into a few different stages. I'm going to give the Kalam cosmological argument, I'm going to be defending the argument, and then talking about some objections. All these arguments I will be using a posteriori evidence. That means that this is evidence based off observation. The deductions are based off observation and experience. So an empiricist can accept this as evidence. In order for my opponent to deny the conclusion of my arguments I put forth, he must deny a premise and carry with his denial a burden of proof to substantiate any objection. Skepticism and what-ifs are not objections. Here is the Kalam. There exists a series of causes and effects and changes, and the number of earlier entities is actually infinite or finite. If the number of earlier entities is finite, then either earlier and later entities are joined together like a loop, such that there is no first member in the series, or the series has a first member. It is not the case that the number of earlier entities is actually infinite. It is not the case that the earlier and later entities are joined together like a loop. Therefore, there is a first cause and a first change. Since the first cause is the first, it must be uncaused. Since everything that begins to exist has a cause, the first cause must be beginningless. Since the first cause did not begin to exist uncaused, the first change must have been caused by a first cause which was initially changeless. In order to cause the first event from an initial changeless state, the first cause must have the capacity to be the originator of the first event in a way that is undetermined by any other prior event, since the first cause is the first, and the capacity to prevent itself from changing, for otherwise the first cause would not have been initially changeless. Both A and B imply the first cause has agency. In order to bring about the entire universe, the first cause must be powerful, and a first cause that is uncaused, beginningless, initially changeless, has agency, and is enormously powerful, is a creator of the universe. Therefore, a creator of the universe exists. Here's a visual representation for any viewers of the slides. Like any argument, I have to substantiate some premises. 3, 4, 7, and 9 each need substantiation. So we're going to rule out an actual infinite regress. For the sake of time, I'm not going to point to scientific evidence for the beginning of the universe. I'm going to be giving arguments for causal finitism. If my interlocutor wants to deny this premise, he must defeat the argument and the arguments that I put forth here. So this is the argument based on traversing infinite time. If the universe did not come into existence, then the present event could not occur. The present event is occurring. Therefore, the universe came into existence. What is the basis for thinking that the present event could not occur if the universe had no beginning? Well, a beginningless universe entails that the regress of past events has no beginning or first event and ends in a particular moment, which is the last event in the sequence. Let us call this regress the beginningless past. The property of being beginningless means that the beginningless past is actually infinite and not merely potentially infinite. For if the past were beginningless, an actually infinite number of events have already occurred prior to the last event in the sequence, and thus a one-to-one correspondence exists between each event that has occurred and each member in the set of natural numbers. The beginningless past, then, is a temporal regress of events that has no beginning, has an end, and is actually infinite. So now time has some indisputable feature to it. For any event E in the temporal sequence of events, if E occurs, then all events prior to E, if any, must have occurred. Hence, if we have, for a sake of explanation, defined an event as one day, then if today is occurring, yesterday must have occurred, and if yesterday occurred, the day prior to yesterday must have occurred, and so on ad infinitum. Thus, if time is beginningless, then if today is occurring, an actually infinite number of days have occurred and an infinite time has been traversed. The problem, however, is that an actually infinite sequence of congruent events, that is, events of identical duration, cannot be traversed. To traverse a sequence means to go through the sequence completely and one member at a time. If a sequence has been traversed, each of its members has been singled out at a unique time. Thus, a traversed sequence is a completed totality. Accordingly, for any temporal sequence of events S has been traversed if and only if all the events in S have occurred one after another. How then can an actually infinite sequence of congruent events be traversed if such a sequence is essentially an endless process? Consider, for example, someone to try to count through all the natural numbers 1 per second. Can the person count through the entire collection of numbers 1 per second? Clearly not. For no matter how many numbers the person has counted, there will always be an infinite number of numbers still to be counted. So, for example, for any number n that one counts, there will always be another number n plus 1 yet to be counted. Therefore, it is impossible to traverse an actually infinite sequence of congruent events, and thus, if the universe did not come into existence, the present event could not occur. But today is occurring, so the past is obviously not infinite. Therefore, an actually infinite sequence of congruent events cannot be traversed, and thus, if the universe had no beginning, the present event could not occur. However, the present event is occurring. It has been reached. This is obvious. So if we define any event as any year, a day, whatever it might be, today is here, and obviously then the past is not infinite. Ruling out a causal loop. For a causal loop in the A theory of time, the members of a series of events come to be one after another, cycles after cycles. Given that an actual infinite regress is impossible, the number of cycles in the past could not have been actually infinite, and thus there must still be a first event and a first cause. If in a static causal loop in which A requires B requires C, and C requires A, it's considered viciously circular. This would violate what mathematicians call the vicious circle principle that states that no object or property may be introduced by definition that depends on the object of the property itself. Establishing the causal principle. I have a few lines of defense for the causal principle. Support one is through experience. Every single day we experience caused beginnings. If you see a dent in your car, you don't assume that it came into existence uncaused. Experience has built an intuition that it has a cause. Support 2 would be a lack of experience. And so in relation to support 1, we have no counterexamples to our everyday experiences. We do not see anvils popping into existence uncaused, nor do we expect to. Support 3 would be from empirical skepticism. An intellectual price tag, so to speak, of denying the premise entails undermining empirical knowledge. A vast majority of science is the study of cause and effect, and if we deny that things begin to exist have a cause, we therefore forfeit our scientific knowledge as well. Any attempts at saying most things begin to exist without a cause will only be ad hoc, and the objector would need to substantiate this claim as well as provide a reliable method to sort out relevant differences between things that have causes and don't. Last support for this would be solipsism. So for this, consider what we would call the problem of gear solipsism. Here's the hypothesis. You are made of uncaused gears that generate all of your experiences. That includes your memories, sensations, and everything. Nothing else exists other than these gears. Your physical body doesn't. The external world is nothing but an illusion. Your experience right now of watching me with your eyes, the experience of you hearing my voice, it's all produced by these gears. Now, if you're wondering where this come from, they came into being 10 minutes ago uncaused. So with that, the question now is, this. How can we rule out Gear solipsism if the causal principle isn't true? So if you're like me, assuming I'm real, the hypothesis strikes you as absurd, but what justifies the absurdity? There's a few ways someone might attempt to do this. One way is to try and argue the best explanation of our experiences isn't gears that came into existence uncaused, but this just assumes the best explanation is more likely than no explanation, which then is just conceding to the causal principle. Lastly, here's a deductive argument for the causal principle. If something X begins to exist uncaused, then Y, which begins to exist, would also begin to exist uncaused. It is not the case that Y begins to exist uncaused, therefore, it is not the case that something begins to exist uncaused. One is true because if X begins to exist uncaused, then A, there would not be any causally antecedent condition which would make it the case that only X rather than Y begins to exist uncaused. The properties of X and the properties of Y which differentiate between them would be had by them only when they already began to exist. And C, the circumstance is compatible with the beginning of the existence of Y. A, B, and C jointly imply that there would be no essential difference between X and Y where beginning to exist uncaused is concerned. To deny the consequent in premise 1, I only have to show that only one event around me does not begin to exist uncaused. In anticipation of Mike's Mereological nihilism, here's argument against it. If emergent properties exist, then wholes are distinct from their parts. Emergent properties exist, like water. Therefore, wholes are distinct from their parts. So for premise 1, emergent properties do not exist when the wholes do not exist, and clearly wholes do begin to exist. It's just a question of whether or not wholes are distinct objects from their parts. But if emergent properties do exist and begin with wholes, then real new properties begin to exist only when wholes begin to exist. So wholes are greater than sum of parts, which means that wholes are real objects distinct from their parts. Modern science agrees with premise 2. Here's a quote for anybody watching the live stream, but I'm not going to read it off. So if my interlocutor insists on Mereological nihilism, he must deny a premise, as well as contribute significantly to the contemporary debate among scientists, by showing everyone how to solve the various problems with models that don't use parts and wholes in chemistry and physics. The agency of the first cause. The first cause is initially changeless. In order for it to change, it must have the capacity to initiate change, for the change cannot be caused by another entity since it's the first cause. The capacity to prevent itself from changing initially, for otherwise the first cause would not have been initially changeless. Now, quantum systems are not changeless entities. Rather, quantum systems are physical systems that are not in constant change. Therefore, quantum systems cannot be the first cause that is initially changeless. So the first cause must have the ability to initiate change. This fits the criteria of having freedom, which postulates a personal agent initiating the change, for again, only agent causation can interrupt a static state of timelessness versus state-event causation. In conclusion, I've given substantial reason to accept the premises of the argument I've given, and therefore the conclusion. This has gone beyond my burden of proof for the purpose of this debate. Remember, our debate topic is there evidence for God, not does God exist? If my opponent is not convinced, the purpose of this debate is only to provide some sort of evidence for theism. In order now for my opponent to win, he must deny a premise, carry with him a burden of proof for this objection, as well as knock down every single piece of evidence I have given. For every single independent point I've given, it raises the probability of theism being true. I'm done.
Sweet. Dylan, will you mute Than, unmute Mike, and Mike, when you're ready, I'll start the timer.
Sure thing.
Yeah, 1 second. Okay. All right, guys, I'm ready. Mike, am I live? Okay. Okay, yeah, so first of all, thank you for having me. This debate has been something I really wanted for a long time. So basically, the debate here is there evidence for God? Or is there evidence for theism? And what Than has just showed us is really that he hasn't shown us that there's evidence of theism, but he showed us that there's perhaps evidence of a first cause. And now there's a plethora, there's an infinite amount of possible first causes, which can be quantum, which can be natural. So theism is not something that emerges from what Than has given us, number one. Number two, he asserted that infinite regress is impossible somehow. That we proved it's impossible. That's not true at all. There are many models in quantum theory, quantum mechanics. There's eternal branching cosmology, which shows that time is infinite in the past, in the future. So does quantum theory models show that time could be infinite in the past and the future. So really, all Thane has done is asserted that there must be a first cause, and I know what that first cause is. I know the exact properties it has. It must be this, it must be this. How is that evidence of a God? Because anything literally can be the cause of the universe, if there was a cause. The universe could be infinite. In science, many physicists also agree that the universe could be infinite in space and time. So I don't see where you can just assert that there's a first cause and therefore God, bam. You need to do a little bit more explanation on that, and hope we can get to that in the near future. But yeah, that's just basically what I had for now. Yeah, go ahead. You can go ahead, Dan.
All right, so I believe after this it's open discussion. I am going to let you guys get into open discussion, and I'm just going to mute. I'm not going to get involved unless argument breaks out or you guys are talking past each other. So just keep it professional and have at it.
Cool. Am I unmuted? Can you hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Cool. Just making sure. All right. So, Mike, the first thing, you said a few things, right? So the first thing I think I want to bring up is you said that the universe could be infinite, but the argument I gave specifically, I gave a proof as to why it couldn't be, right? I gave an argument against traversing an actual infinite, and I gave you premises, and I substantiated both of them. So in order for you to say that it's possible, you're going to have to deny a premise and carry with it a burden of proof.
Well, what do you mean? There are models in science that show us that the universe can be infinite. Just because you haven't substantiated anything, you just asserted that it can't be.
Well, I did substantiate it.
You've ontologically proposed that it must be infinite, but you haven't shown it empirically, right? And that's the point here. So you're proposing that the universe metaphysically must be infinite or can't be infinite. Causal finitism is true, but what you're doing is there's no empirical basis for that. How do you distinguish your imagination from what occurs in reality? That's it. That's what we want to. That's what matters here. How can you differentiate between imagination and reality? That's up to you.
Yeah,
you have the burden of proof there.
Right, and I substantiate between imagination and reality through the laws of logic and deduction. So I gave you a deductive argument, right?
Okay, but there's no empirical data behind your argument. That's the point. There's empirical data that shows us the universe may be infinite in time and space. The empirical data shows that.
Right. So I don't understand what you're saying here, because you're saying I don't have empirical data that the universe can't be infinite. So are you denying the laws of logic?
No, but you can use logic. Of course, logic is great, but without the empirical data to substantiate your logic, you don't have anything. You just have a proposition. That's all you have.
So, Mike, if you're going to deny a priori, laws of logic, mathematical proofs, which my argument technically is, you've just undermined all of your knowledge.
But mathematics doesn't show. Mathematics shows us that the universe could be infinite.
Okay, can you demonstrate that?
Do I have to bring out the studies with Sean Carroll and Michio Kaku-Branky and all these physicists?
Can you demonstrate that the universe can be infinite? Because if you can demonstrate that,
yes, quantum theory does. Quantum Schrodinger's equation, quantum mechanics. I'm not a scientist, right? I don't know all of it, but I can tell you this. Many scientists do believe this, especially Sean Carroll.
So here's the thing, Mike. My argument would disprove. If it's sound and valid, it would disprove their models.
It's not sound. It's valid. Just because your logic
Okay,
is
so
valid
why
doesn't mean
why
it's
isn't
sound.
it sound? I gave substantiations for my premises. You have to carry
What
with
exactly is the empirical data that shows us the universe cannot be infinite?
I don't need empirical data for a deductive argument here.
Okay.
This
well, you need
is
something.
first of all, this is an AP. This is what?
Okay, without the empirical data, how do you know something? How do you differentiate something between imagination and reality? We come
The
back to
laws
this
of
the whole time.
logic, deduction, and a posteriori knowledge.
The laws of logic, we use that in science and empiricism too.
Right,
but
we do.
It's also based on empirical data. All of our logic.
So, Mike, you have to deny a premise here. You can't just sit here and say this is unsubstantiated because I just dedicated all this time to substantiating those premises.
You
say-
haven't.
Mike, playing the skeptic here is not an objection to my argument.
What do you mean? So you're going to tell me you know more than the scientists that say that the universe could be infinite in space and time? You're just going to ignore that?
You can appeal to authority all you want, but this is a debate
No,
between you
this
and
isn't
I.
authority. This is science. Like, science can demonstrate to you that the universe could be
Okay,
infinite
so
in
then
space.
demonstrate where the science says that one of my premises are wrong.
Schrodinger's equation.
What is that Schrodinger's? What does that say?
It says that the universe could be infinite in space in time in the
But
past.
that's just a
eternally, in the future,
tautology,
eternally.
right? You're saying it could be X because this says
I
it could
don't
be
know
this.
the exact. I don't know. I'm not a quantum physicist, so I don't know exactly everything.
Okay, so then
But
if you
I can
don't
tell
really
you
know
that
if you
that's
don't
what
really
many
know what this
physicists
is,
believe.
if you don't really know what you're talking about, then deny a premise. You can't just be like,
But
well,
the
these people say
scientists do.
this. Yeah, there's also scientists that
But
say
the
that the
s-
universe could be finite. Right? You have
Yes,
to, you have
the
to,
point
you
is
have
that
to
it's
interact.
possible that you could be wrong.
I'm not
That's
saying
the
I'm
point.
not saying it's impossible that I'm wrong. I'm not right,
Yeah.
but you have
Okay,
to. But you have to interact with the argument I just put up.
Okay. Yes. It's just not. I just don't see how it's substantiated at all. But
But that's not an objection.
We can concede. We can concede to that. Let's just say there was a first cause. Like,
Okay.
I can still concede to that. And okay, what does that do? How does that improve the probability of theism being true?
So given the hypothesis of theism, right? It's predictable that there would be a first cause if God does exist because he would be the first cause.
So is it in quantum mechanics? So in quantum mechanics is
I
it
understand that,
predictable
but
too?
that still raises the problem. The purpose of the debate tonight is there evidence for theism? Evidence is something that just raises probability, and that's it.
Yeah,
that's-
you just
that's
gave
the
us
debate.
evidence that there may be a first cause. You haven't
Yes.
given us evidence of theism.
But I did because we would predict, given theism, that there would be a first cause. It doesn't
Yeah, but
prove
there's
theism.
an infinite amount of possible theistic
Well, actually, so
worldviews.
so let's talk about your quantum systems. You said it could have been a quantum system, right?
But let's go back to the point I was just making. There's an infinite amount of theistic worldviews you can take. How does obviously you're a Christian.
I'm
how
not
does
arguing
your
for the
worldview-
Christian God in this.
Okay, but it doesn't matter. Whatever you are, right? How does it improve the chances of your theistic worldview?
This is just theism simpliciter. What model of theism you hold doesn't really hold relevance to this debate.
Okay, you've done nothing. All you've done is say the universe perhaps had a first cause, therefore theism is more likely.
Well, I didn't do that. That's a
We
complete
don't know
straw man
how
of my
much. We
argument.
don't know. What if it's likely by like a 0.0001%? Like,
That's still evidence for theism, and you just conceded the debate.
really? Well, it's not very strong evidence.
But that's
Just
not the
raising the
debate.
probability of something by 0.00001% does not really improve the probability that much.
Mike, that's not the debate, though. The debate is I said that there's evidence for theism, and you're holding the negation.
We both agreed that it would be evidence of God, right? Not just theism, but God.
Yeah, theism and God go hand in hand.
Okay, but God has specific properties, does he not?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now can you get into because if we're going to argue about this theism, isn't it better that we argue more about God itself? Like, that's really the good stuff,
Yeah.
right?
So that's you kind of straw man me when you said, "Oh, here's a first cause. It's God." Right? You just ignored half of the premises that I gave.
Well, that's what most theists say. But you go ahead and give us the properties of your God and explain how it's possible or more likely.
Well, I argued first of all that it couldn't be a quantum system, right? Because I said the first cause would have to be initially changeless.
quantum systems could be unchanging,
Do you want me? So I have. Let me find it here.
or random, or determined.
Right.
So
but
can
they're
your
not,
God
but they're
be
not
determined?
changeless.
They could be changeless, just like your God.
So I
could be
have a
changeless.
paper I have a paper
and by the
from
way,
Kibber-
I can just say, hey, anything. There's this thing here I call, a magic artichoke, and this thing is changeless.
an artichoke
and this is
wouldn't
what
be a
causes the
transcendent
universe.
immaterial thing, right? So
It doesn't have to be transcendent. It doesn't have to be transcendent immaterial. Why? Why does it have to be transcendent or immaterial? Why?
Okay, so let's tackle one thing at a time. So let's do your matter thing. Let's see here. So regarding like the immateriality of the first cause. So I mentioned, first of all, there's a paper by Kimberly K. Body, Sean Carroll, and Jason Pollack in 2016. And they say in quantum physics, physical entities constantly fluctuate at the quantum levels described by the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. So if you ask how can we rule out the possibility of some kind of like special kind of matter or something else at the physical state, it's similar to asking how can we rule out the possibility of some special kind of water that is not H2O, right? So if you discover some kind of liquid that's not H2O, it would be inappropriate to call it water. It's breaking the law of identity. So like many philosophers like
Yeah, that's not what we're doing here. That's
but
not
you
what
just
I'm
said
doing.
a magic artichoke.
Yeah, and this is a magic one. This has special properties just like your God, right? But the only difference is that it's not
But an
conscious, it's
artichoke
not
is still
omnipotent,
material.
It's not all these other kinds.
Mike, an artichoke
What?
is still material.
No, this is a magic artichoke.
It's still material.
Just like your magic
adding,
God, right?
Adding magic to just throwing magic onto
So,
it.
and
So
I
you're
can
not
say the
talking
same
about an
your
artichoke
God,
anymore.
And I can say the same about God.
You're
I
not
can
talking
say the same
about
thing
an-
about God.
You're not talking about an artichoke anymore, Mike.
Yes, this is a magic artichoke. I know that. I'm not talking about the one that you see around you. I'm talking about a magic one. You can't see it. It's not there.
Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it's immaterial.
I know, but it's special. It's a magic artichoke, just like your God, right? Just like you
No,
give
it's
your,
not just
your
like my
God
God.
magic properties. Yes, it is.
No, unless you look,
I
Mike.
can
If you're
claim
gonna,
it is, just like you claim God is.
Mike, if
I
you're
can do
gonna
the same
claim,
here.
no, you're breaking laws of identity here.
No, I'm not saying this is an actual artichoke, like the fruit or the vegetable. I'm not
Okay,
actually
so
saying
then what's the difference
is a
between
magic
you?
one.
So you're just describing what I'm calling God at this
It-
point.
no,
You're
I'm
just
not.
naming it an
It has
artichoke.
different properties.
Okay, what's the properties,
No, I'm
Mike?
giving it different No, listen.
What are the
You
properties of
believe that
magic
God is
artichoke?
omnipotent, right?
What are the properties
You
of
believe
magic?
that.
No, let's figure this out. What
It's
are the
eternal?
properties of your
I'll give it
magic
to you right now.
artichoke?
I'll give it to you. It's eternal and is capable of creating universes. Done.
Okay,
That's it.
That's-
It's not omnipotent.
what else-
It's not
what else
omnipotent,
is
It's
there?
not conscious. Nothing. That's it.
but I specifically
capable
just gave
of causing universe-
just gave evidence for why it can't have to be immaterial.
It's not immaterial. It doesn't have to be immaterial.
So you're gonna
could be
deny
anything.
Sean Carroll's law of identity issues within his academic paper that I cited.
No, it's quantum. So quantum fluctuations are physical things, right?
Yep. And I said
And
and
they're
I said the
capable-
first
and
cause
they
has
are
to be
cap-
changeless.
And they are capable of creating universes, right?
Yes, but
10 minutes.
Mike, you have to. I just gave you Sean Carroll, right, an atheist, who said quantum systems are always changing, and the first event, the first cause, is changeless.
It doesn't. Quantum space doesn't always have to change. It
Okay,
could
well
be
now you're
random.
disagreeing with Sean Carroll, one of your like favorite people.
I never said that.
So what
Just
evidence
because-
do you
so-
have that
so
quantum?
just because they
What
say
evidence
that-
do you have? What evidence do you have that quantum fluctuations don't have to be changeless? I mean, don't have to be changing all the time.
So there are. So in quantum physics, there are theories where there in some pockets of the universe, time is static. Time doesn't change at all. It's very possible that you don't have to
Okay,
have
can you
change.
demonstrate that?
Yes, in physics we can,
Oh, I'm not asking if physicists can. Can you do it?
but it doesn't even matter in the first place. Let's just say that this magic artichoke is eternal, even if it was immaterial. Okay, let's just say it's immaterial. But it's determined. It's not conscious. It doesn't have to cause the universe. It just randomly did.
Well, then it couldn't cause
Or
the
it
universe.
was determined to. Or it was determined to. Period. Done.
What would determine it?
I've now shown you.
No, you didn't.
I've now given you a better explanation.
Mike,
more
what
simple,
would
using Occam's razor.
what would determine it's something that doesn't have agency, that's a first cause, to cause something? How could
It's nature. It's nature. Did God choose his nature?
Are you saying the artichoke's nature is necessary?
Yes, just like your God. Did
That's
God
fine.
choose his nature?
So now you're
Did God choose his nature?
Hold on, Mike.
Yes or no?
No.
Did God choose
God's
his
nature is
nature?
necessary, but here's the problem.
Exactly, just like the artichokes. Done. Done.
No,
I've
Mike,
just
you're
now shown you
Mike,
a
no.
simpler explanation using
did-
Occam's razor that
Can I
a magic
get a word in,
artichoke is
Mike?
a better explanation
Mike.
for the universe.
No, you're
Don't
contradicting.
interrupt one another. Come on now.
Mike, you're contradicting yourself. You just said that this thing is an initially changeless thing. So how did it go from changing?
No.
From changeless
Okay,
to changing?
let's just say it does change. It does change.
Mike,
It's
let him
immaterial and it's
finish.
eternal.
Mike,
No,
Let him
stop.
finish.
Stop. The magic artichoke is eternal. It doesn't change and it's immaterial. It's not conscious though. It was
it
determined
doesn't. So
to be
then,
that way because of its nature.
how is it
Just
the first
like God.
cause? So how is it the first cause if it doesn't change?
I never said it's unchanging. I'm sorry. It does
Okay,
change.
so now you're gonna have to argue against my premises that say that the first event is unchanging.
What? You're God. Okay. I can again, I can say the artichoke is unchanging. I can flip up just like anybody can.
Okay, fine.
Then
how does the
make up
artichoke
anything I want. The
then
point is
go
that-
from changeless to changing? If it cannot,
Give us the properties. Just give us the properties of your God. What are the
no,
properties of
don't
your
burden shift here, Mike. You're the one proposing a different hypothesis,
Yeah, just like
and
you
I'm
are.
showing
Give
you
us-
how your
give us the
hypothesis
properties of
doesn't
your God.
work.
Just give us the properties of your God.
Why would I do that? Why are you burden shifting?
Because you're the one who claims God is real, right?
And you're the one.
I'm trying to show you
You're
using
the
your
one
own
that's
logic.
claiming you can posit a magical artichoke that
Yes,
caused the universe.
just like you can posit a magical man or magical God, right? It's the same thing.
Well, you're just kind of
I'm showing
retreating
you
now from
using
your
your own logic.
initial point. So if you want to go to a different point, we can do that.
Okay. Let's give us the properties of your God. What are the properties of God?
Well, I said so. That doesn't really matter to my argument here. Do you want to tackle the agency thing? What do you want to tackle next? Because you still haven't.
Just give us the properties of God.
Okay. Like I said, metaphysically ultimate, has agency, has the omni properties.
Okay. And why are any of those necessary?
Well, the
creating a
argument doesn't
universe.
speak on any of those. Those are different arguments that I would give.
I know we're not talking about the first cause argument. I concede that there may have been a first cause. I agree.
Okay, so the debate's over.
How is it over?
Because I just you
We're talking about-
concede
we're
you
talking
just
about
conceded
theism.
to something that raises the probability of theism.
Okay, can you give us the evidence of God, though? We're not just talking about theism. We're talking about your God, right? Or whatever God you want.
So before we move on, do you understand that you just conceded to the debate? That
No,
there
I
is
didn't
evidence for
concede.
God?
This is why I didn't concede to losing the argument, because there's an infinite amount of possible things or entities that could have went into creating the first cause. That's the point.
I understand that, but that doesn't
Just
negate
saying, oh, there was a first cause, it doesn't raise the probability of any particular
Well,
theology.
yeah, but that's
it
not my
raises the
argument.
probability of a first cause.
But Mike,
That's it.
did you listen to any of the 20 minutes that I was speaking?
Yes.
Okay,
And
so
it was
I gave
irrelevant. Everything you said was completely irrelevant. There may have been a first cause. Big deal. How do you know that first cause was God? It could
Okay,
be a
so
natural
Mike,
thing,
what was
a natural entity.
what was premise 9 in my argument?
5
Come on,
minutes.
dude. The
What
point
was
is that
no. Don't dodge this. What was premise 9
I
in
don't
my
know
argument?
I don't know I forgot.
Okay,
It was a very boring intro.
it was a boring intro. That's not an excuse for not paying attention to your interlocutor's argument. You haven't engaged
Well,
with
the
anything
point-
I said.
I already conceded that there may have been a first cause.
But my argument
Okay,
isn't only
big
that there's a
deal.
first cause.
Okay, what else is your argument then?
I said,
About
okay,
God.
sure, yeah, let's go back to my argument. So since the first change did not begin to exist uncaused, the first change must have been caused by the first cause, which was initially changeless. Premise 9 was, in order to cause the first event from an initial changeless state, the first cause must have A, the capacity to be the originator of the event in a way that is undetermined by any prior event, since the first cause is the first, and B, the capacity to prevent itself from changing, for otherwise the first cause would not have been initially changeless. Both A and B imply the first cause has agency, and I gave 2 slides of substantiation for that premise too.
Why couldn't the first cause have been determined?
Determined by what? Determination is an
Anything.
external factor.
Okay, why couldn't the first cause have been determined?
What What would determine the first cause when there's nothing outside the first cause?
The nature of existence, right? I can say the same. So for God, did God choose his nature?
That's different than a determination.
No, because was God determined to do anything due to his nature, right?
No,
God is determined to do things
God is
because of his
determined to
nature.
do anything.
So, how can God change his nature?
I didn't say God can change his nature, but I think God has agency and freedom and libertarian freedom.
But clearly, if he cannot change his nature, then he's determined to be the way he is, right?
To be the way he is, but that's different than making a decision.
Well, isn't the way we are, doesn't that influence our decisions that we make? Like, if God is all loving, doesn't that make his decisions more towards the loving side?
Sure, but that doesn't have anything to do with something that doesn't have agency, that's initially changeless, all of a sudden spurting something into existence.
Yeah, nobody's ever saying that. But
Well, you are. You just posited a magic artichoke that's initially changeless that somehow decided to start changing things.
just like your God, right?
Right,
God
but-
doesn't change, right?
So then, how do you go from a static? How do you go from a static state?
I can ask the same question about your God.
Because he has agency.
How does
Agency
an
is the-
unchanging God cause change?
Because he has agency. That's
Just
the best
like
way
the
to explain
artichoke.
everything.
Just like the artichoke.
An artichoke has agency now.
It's a magic artichoke.
Okay, Mike, all you're doing is relabeling God.
No, I'm not. I'm not. This is why. Because you're saying God is all loving, omnipotent, and all these things, all these other properties that you're giving it. These are excess properties that you've made up. You're defining God into existence. That's all you're doing. That's the point I'm trying to get to you.
Well, I'm not defining
This magic
God into
artichoke is
existence.
not. This magic artichoke is evil. It's evil. It doesn't want.
What is
it
evil,
doesn't,
Mike?
Well, there's no objective evil.
Okay, so
I'm trying to use your logic.
How is
I'm
artichoke
trying to
evil
use your
then?
logic. What?
How's the artichoke evil then?
I'm using your logic.
What logic am I
Because
using?
you say God is good, right? I'm just giving the antithesis. God is.
What
this
logic am I
artichoke is
using?
evil. I'm using your epistemology.
Which is what?
What do you mean, dude?
What is my
You're a
epistemology?
theist.
What is
You're a
me
theist.
being a theist have to
You're
do with my
giving God all these
epistemology?
properties. Can you answer the question? I'm trying to give you an example of an entity that was the first cause and wasn't God.
Yeah, but
There's an infinite
the
amount of
properties you're
examples.
assigning this magic artichoke hypothesis are the same thing as God at this point.
No, they're different. This is an evil artichoke. What are you not understanding about this? It's
Right,
an
but
evil
Mike, the
artichoke.
debate
It's
tonight
not
is:
loving.
is there evidence for
It's
theism?
not all powerful. And guess what? It's not all powerful.
Oh, sure, I can give an
It
argument.
has
I can
limits
give
to
an
its power.
Sure, I can give an argument really quick for why it would be all powerful.
The point is that it's
Well,
not all
hold on.
knowing.
Let me
It
give you
doesn't
let me give you an argument for why the first cause should be all powerful. Right?
Why?
So, because the first cause gave way to all the universe, right? It has causal power. That means it has power, right? So, premise 1, there are limited things. Premise 2, limited things have an explanation for their existence. Premise 3, the totality of all limited things cannot be explicable by limited things. Therefore, there is something purely unlimited. Any property this first cause has would be purely unlimited in that property, quantifiably speaking. So, it's infinitely powerful.
So how do you know limited things have an explanation for their existence?
The same way we can see the causal principle is true.
That's not equivalent. That's not equivalent to explaining something's existence, right?
And
When I
that's
say-
time. That's time. So let's do closing statements, 5 minutes each, to wrap it up. And it's since you went first, T.
Yep.
You go first on closing, and Mike will wrap it up.
Yeah. Okay. So again, I really appreciated the conversation, Mike. I had fun. So I guess for a closing statement, all I'm gonna say is just for the audience, anybody that's listening, Mike has not engaged at all with any of the evidence I've given, any of the arguments I've given. He didn't deny a premise. He didn't deny any of the substantiations I've given. Did not really put a dent in this. So my burden of proof for this debate was to provide anything that raises the probability of theism, even by a fraction of a fraction of a fraction of a percentage. And Mike actually conceded to that during this debate. Not only that, since Mike did not reject any of my premises and interact with any of my arguments whatsoever, he actually has not done anything to my proof of God's existence here. So I just urge all the listeners here to take that into consideration as you mull over this debate. And I guess I'll just stop there.
All right, that was under 5 minutes. Mike, when you're ready, I'll start the timer.
Yeah, you didn't prove God's existence with that. All you did was say there was a first cause, which it's irrelevant to anything. There may have been a first cause, there may have not been a first cause. It doesn't have to be God. It could be magic artichoke with natural properties that is not omnipotent, not omniscient. None of those things are necessary. You're going to say it's God is a maximally great being. Well, I can say that's an arbitrary definition. I can say anything's maximally great. I can just define anything as God and say that's what created the universe. You haven't really done anything for God. And just because theism entails a first cause doesn't mean that you've improved the chances of your God being true. So, you've done nothing. Even if I did concede to the first cause, it's irrelevant. All you've done is just say there was a first cause, maybe, which science disagrees with that. So, yeah, I don't see how God comes into the picture at all. You haven't even really defined God in the first place. And, I mean, you have. I'm sorry. You've given us the properties which are arbitrary, that you've just decided are the properties of God because you just arbitrarily decided that. I don't see how you can get to God from first cause. There's a big gap there. And 0.00001% is not much of anything, especially in science. That doesn't do anything. There's an infinite amount of possibilities for what the first cause could have been. So to even that, so everything has a 0.001% chance. So you've done nothing. But I appreciate the talk. I do appreciate the talk, and hopefully we can talk more. But yeah.
All right, and that concludes the debate. Thank you, everybody, for listening.
Cool. Am I
Thanks.
unmuted? Thanks again, Mike.
No, you're not.
Thank you. Appreciate it.